Welcome, ladies, to tonight's breakout session. And tonight's session deals with a very important topic of youth suicide prevention. This session qualifies for PDU credit. So for those of you who wish to receive a certificate of participation for PDU credit, after this session, please send me an email with your mailing address. My email address can be found in chat. I was the first one, I think I'm at the top of the list in chat, and my email address is there where I signed in. This session also counts toward our statewide attendance award that was outlined in the March issue of The Voice. And to get credit for being here tonight, please use the chat feature to sign in. You need to type your first and last name and the name of your chapter. Make sure you're sending the information to everyone. You may do that now if you haven't already done so. I think most of you have already signed in, but if you haven't, go to chat, put your first and last name and your chapter name. At this time, please set your screen on speaker view and mute your computers. And Sue Loader will now introduce tonight's presenter.
It's my privilege to present Laurel Biever, LPC, is a suicide prevention specialist in the Center for Suicide Prevention and Research and a mental health counselor in the Behavioral Health Department at Nationwide Children's Hospital. Laurel has been at NCH for 10 years and in the mental health field for 24 years, working with many populations. She has particular interest in working with schools and community organizations to increase awareness of suicide and help others understand how we all can help prevent suicide in our youth. Here's Laurel.
Hello, thank you so much for having me, everyone. As I was sitting here waiting for this to start, I feel like I'm at a reunion. You guys are all, saying, "Oh, I haven't seen you forever," and it's really fun to see the camaraderie. And yes, this is a very serious topic, very necessary as well. And one of the important things to remember. Can everybody see my screen? There we go. What is important to remember is to take care of yourself. So the more that you give to yourself, the more love you have to give others, and the more value you can add to the world. And in order to do that, you need to take care of yourself. So with this being such a serious topic, suicide has affected many people in many different ways, as well as just mental health in general. So if you need to take a break, please do so. Do whatever you need to do to take care of yourself. I am the kind of presenter that likes to have questions. So, feel free to put something in the chat box for afterwards. But even during the presentation today, if you have a question on something in the moment, feel free to unmute yourself and ask me. I'm very happy to field questions as they come up. A lot of times it's easier to do that instead of try to remember what you're going to ask and, as it applies in that moment and everything. Please ask questions. So I work for the Center for Suicide Prevention and Research, and we are a community resource. We're funded by a board at Nationwide Children's Hospital. They developed our program for us to go out and provide these services at no cost. And the main thing that we do is, consultation about prevention of suicide, how to assess for suicide, and intervention when someone is having suicidal concerns. And then, unfortunately, if after a suicide, we are a resource to schools and community members and community organizations to help know how to manage those situations. Today we're doing a gatekeeper training. It's called Training Trusted Adults. So we get out what the main concerns are, what to be looking for when you're seeing people, looking at what maybe risk factors and warning signs there are. Another really important part that we do as our organization is we want to really help reduce the stigma around mental health and suicide, and really build up people's ability to talk about it. And we really believe that talking about suicide and getting it out there really helps decrease that stigma. Instead of it being a hush hush thing. Like, I'm sure many of you probably remember back in the day when you didn't want to say the word cancer because it was such a stigmatizing condition. Well, the same thing has been going on for suicide. And the more that we can talk about it and get information out there, the more that we can really teach people about it and help prevent suicide as much as possible. Also, I like to really help during these presentations, help people understand what supports are out there for them, their families, how to develop some coping strategies that may help with some prevention of suicide as well. And then we really like the part of our mission statement that I think is really crucial is that we really engage every community member to help them understand their role in preventing suicide, because each and every one of us has an ability to be able to help when we are actually presented with concerns like that. Today, what I'd like to focus on is really presenting what youth suicide and depression is, what the prevalence is, how often is this happening, where is it happening, really looking into what the risk factors and warning signs are for suicide. And then we're going to shift into learning how to help support suicide prevention in the community, whether that's, again, destigmatizing and supporting a culture that really values mental health instead of being scared of it, or not wanting to talk about it. We find that's very important. We're also going to talk about youth suicide and building resiliency, what needs to happen in our kids as from the beginning going forward and throughout their lifetime to help build resiliency against some of these concerns. And I'll try to leave some time at the end for question and answer. I tend to really get into the topic. So if that's why I want you to ask questions throughout as opposed to just waiting to the end, but I will try to leave time at the end as well. To start off, what I'd like to do is just mention what the actual definitions of these of suicide is death caused by an act of injury to oneself with the intention to die. And that statement, with the intention to die, is paramount in understanding, because there are things that people die by that people may think may be suicide, but if there's not an intention to die, then and it's not actually a suicidal act, such as self-injury. Self-injury is purposeful, harmful physical acts to oneself, but it's without the intention to die. People can have both at the same time, though. They can have suicidal thoughts and they can have self-injury. So they can be comorbid at the same time, but sometimes self-injury is just a way to try to help reduce internal pain, internal struggles. A suicide attempt is a non-fatal attempt to try to kill yourself. It may result in injury and it may not. And I'll go into more detail about that later. Suicide attempts are actually more prevalent than people would actually understand that they are. And suicidal ideation is basically thinking about or considering and planning wanting to die by suicide. So specifically, the problem with youth suicide is it is the second leading cause of death for our teens. Anywhere from 10 to 24 years old, it's a second leading cause of death. And, that can be surprising to people. And actually what this slide isn't showing is that suicide has actually tripled with teens that are from 10 to 14-year-old teen girls. That has just tripled in the last decade. when you think about that being the second leading cause of death, and you look at the numbers of how many people in 2018 died by suicide in our country, it's hard to kind of wrap your head around what those numbers actually mean. So I want to put it in reference to other leading causes of death. So if you look at this, these are the 6 other leading causes of death in the country with our youth. And if you add all 6 of those up together, combined, it doesn't even add to the amount of we lose in a year by suicide. Suicide, like I said, 10 years old, you know, it affects our younger kids too. That's the second leading cause of death for 10-year-olds. But even so, even kids under 12 plan, attempt, and actually complete suicide. It's a second leading cause of death for 12-year-olds, like I mentioned. It's the 8th leading cause of death for kids under 12 years old. In 9 and 10-year-olds, it's actually, the rates are 6% actually had suicidal thoughts, and 1% of 9 and 10-year-olds have actually attempted suicide in our country. A lot of times people don't realize that younger kids even think about suicide, let alone understand what death means. And well, people wouldn't have suicidal thoughts when they're that young because they don't even know what death is. It doesn't matter. Well, the point is if someone has the thought that they don't want to be here, they don't necessarily understand the permanence of death, but they're still having that thought. And although it is a small number of kids, it still is a concerning number, and the age range has been getting younger and younger as we go on. It's just recently that that the second leading cause of death became for 12-year-olds. It used to be a little bit higher than that. And you know, we need to take it seriously anytime that we feel like a child is struggling. If they say something about it, we need to take it seriously and look at what we need to do for them. When we look at depression and suicide among high school students, these are some sobering statistics as well. So when you think about a classroom, I heard someone earlier talking about when they were a teacher. When you think about a classroom of 30 kids, that's a typical class size these days. And you look at what the depression and suicide rates are there. 12 kids, that's 37% in a class of 30 kids, has actually felt so sad or hopeless for 2 weeks or more that they've stopped doing some usual activity. That is a significant sign of depression. 6 or 19% have seriously considered attempting suicide. 5 out of the 30 kids, so 16%, have actually made a suicide plan. And 3 out of every 30 kids in high school have actually attempted suicide. So these numbers are really big, and we as a center, we go in to help schools put suicide prevention programs in place to help right there where it is, help the kids learn what suicide is, what the warning signs and risk factors are, and we teach the whole staff as well on what to do. And then we also go through screening processes with those children while we're doing that prevention program, and trying to get this as close to the source as we can. Where can you get most kids? Almost all kids go to school. So it's been a wonderful place to be able to go in and really get the word out about this and help kids. All that is a really sobering and heavy topic, but what I do want to leave you with right now is that suicide is preventable. If we get kids identified early, get them into treatment, whether that's going into counseling or talk therapy, getting them to their primary care physician or to a psychiatrist, whatever it is, to get medication. A lot of times a combination of those are important. That really helps with prevention. And then, like what you guys are doing, having me come to your conference and present this material is so important, because we need to get this out to the wider population. We need to get this out to the community in general, so other people know and understand this concern and know how to address it. So to start off, I want to go through some facts. I'll intermittently do this throughout the presentation. People that are depressed and use alcohol or other drugs are at greater risk for suicide. And why is that? Because alcohol adds to a person's depression. What alcohol is an actual depressant, categorically is a depressant. So with someone that's depressed and then they drink alcohol on top of it, it adds to their depression. Alcohol and drugs also influence people to do things in ways that they would normally not do them when they were like sober. They wouldn't necessarily take as many risks. And so alcohol and drugs lead to poor decision making, and it really increases the chance that if someone is having suicidal thoughts, that they'll act on them. Youth that have any type of major depressive episode, if someone has had one, they're 2 times more likely to actually use drugs. And what we do know that is if they're drinking while down or drinking while depressed, that increases their risk of suicide by 75%. So, you know, it's a lethal combination. I want to go into talking more specifically about what some of the risk factors are. I think you can probably guess what at least what the top 2 are that we've already been talking about. Sorry about that. Depression, so I've already hit on that. Alcohol and drug use. And then this one might surprise people, but previous suicide attempts. If someone has actually gone forward and actually attempted suicide in the past, they are at greater risk, even if they have gotten some treatment. We need to continue to monitor folks that have actually attempted suicide. The rates of their risk of reattempting in the first 3 years is significant. It's really significant the first week and first month, but it stays significant for the first 3 years. What are some other risk factors that we really need to be taking into consideration? 90% of people that die by suicide have some type of mental health concern, whether that's depression, alcohol, drug use, hospitalization for depression or some type of mental health condition. That's important. And so to realize that. And so some of the other aspects of risk are psychological aspects, like having negative feelings, feeling really lonely, having behavioral issues. A lot of people don't realize that kids that are acting out are at greater risk, as well as kids that are depressed and feeling really lonely and isolative. And when you're looking at those psychological aspects, it's really looking at this whole aspect of depression. Although anxiety now is also a risk factor for suicide, and anxiety and depression overlap quite a bit anyway, but depression has always been one of the top 3. Some of the biological considerations that we need to think about when we're talking about risk factors are, their gender, male, female, and we have plenty other ones now as well to consider, but boys are 2 times more likely to actually attempt suicide, and to actually die by suicide, and girls are 3 to 4 times more likely actually to attempt. So boys, if they actually do attempt, they actually die more often, and girls that attempt, they attempt more often, but they don't die as often. And why would that be? That has to do with how they are trying to kill themselves. What's the means in that they're actually doing to end their lives. Another piece that I want to really mention is distress related to being LGBTQ. So what LGBTQ means is lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and questioning or queer. The people that identify as that, they aren't feeling as accepted. It's not that their biology that is creating them to be more suicidal, it's their acceptance from their community and with themselves and in their families. All of those things really play a role. And then lastly, with biological considerations, genetics. We know that people that struggle with depression and other mental health issues, there's many times a genetic factor. And so if someone's relatives have had depression, and if somebody's relatives actually attempted suicide, they're at greater risk. Then we look at the environmental implications. What are the risk factors in someone's environment? So access to actually having something to use to attempt them to suicide. You know, that has a lot of different issues. So what we know that if someone is at risk, we talk a lot to the family about restricting means. And what that means is, you know, having people lock up medicines. Girls are more likely to attempt suicide by overdosing on medicines. Locking up weapons or removing them from the home for the time being, because boys are more likely to use guns as a way to try to kill themselves. And you can see why then boys would be more likely to die by suicide, because it's really hard to come back from a gunshot wound versus you can get in there and hopefully reduce some of the impact of medicines by getting the person help quickly. Gunshot wounds aren't as easy to manage with that. Also, people that have had a history of some type of abuse, whether it's physical, sexual, emotional abuse, or as I was mentioning with LGBTQ youth, if they're not feeling accepted or if they're feeling bullied, they are at greater risk. Also, kids that bully other people, they're at greater risk for suicide. Can you imagine what they're feeling inside if they're doing those mean things to other people? Many times kids that are bullying others have a lot of depression or mental health concerns as well. And then someone that knows somebody that's died by suicide, that can put them at greater risk as well. And I'm not saying just necessarily someone close to them, because what they've found research-wise, that even if it's somebody, it's actually people that aren't in the core group of friends. If someone dies by suicide, they're more likely to attempt suicide than someone that's in the core group, because someone that's in that core group understands the ramifications and sees the pain and the results that come from a suicide loss, where someone in the bubble right outside of that core group might identify as they found a way out of their pain. They know they can do something. I see they have done something to try to get out of this. And then it gives them that idea of that. That's called social contagion. When we're talking about risk factors, I want to mention that just because someone has a risk factor doesn't mean they're going to actually attempt suicide. The point of bringing up these risk factors is for you to know, okay, if you see someone that's struggling, do they have these risk factors? Because I'm also going to talk about what the warning signs would be to actually attempting suicide. And then also talking about protective factors. What are protective factors that could keep somebody that might have a lot of risk factors from actually attempting? We'll get into that in a little bit. So with depression being one of the top 3 reasons or risk factors, I want to go more into detail about that. And 90% of people that die by suicide have at least one mental health issue, like I mentioned. But I want to be clear on there's a difference between depression and sadness. And as we go to schools and we're talking to youth about this, sometimes they get confused about that. And so what is the difference? Well, sadness is a common occurrence that most of us have some point or another, and it's a temporary feeling. Where if you see under the sign here about what the signs of depression are, depression is a serious health concern, and there are major changes that happen in someone's body and mind and behavior that last for 2 weeks or more in several of these areas. So that's the difference. It's not temporary, and it's pretty pervasive. It affects multiple areas of someone's life. So specifically, I like this little slide about the difference between sadness and depression, because people's concept of what depression is isn't always accurate. You know, they just consider this overall feeling bad all the time. Well, there's a lot of different pieces to it. There's like feeling, sometimes people that are depressed don't feel necessarily sad, they just feel nothing at all. So it can be hard to talk to someone and always identify right off the bat, you know, what's actually going on with them. A lot of times there's anxiety along with it. A lot of times there's a lot of guilt. Almost always there's a lot of isolation. But there are the kids that fool you, and they're out there gregarious, doing a lot of things that they keep their schedule, they keep going. So it's a very complex condition, and I'm going to go more into specifics about each of the areas of depression. So before I do that, I want to go into what the warning signs are. So we already have understanding of what the risk factors are, and the warning signs that someone may give off that they are going to attempt suicide. The big thing is, are they acting differently? Are they acting unusual? Are they not acting like they normally would? Are they not responding the way they normally would with a depressive or irritability, acting out type of behavior? Sometimes people that have decided to end their life, they'll give away important belongings of theirs that they know someone else loves, or that they want to make sure they get taken care of. A lot of times they'll make final contact through, emails, texts, calls, sometimes writing letters. Oftentimes you see one of these final goodbye statements because they're very torn. It's not that they want to die, they just can't keep living the way that they're feeling. Another warning sign is an increase in risky or reckless behavior. So if someone's decided that they want to die and that they're going to kill themselves, they're not necessarily caring about engaging behaviors that can be really disastrous to them. So whether that's driving a car recklessly, an 8-year-old getting on the roof and jumping off like they're Superman because they're just going to be able to survive that, or they don't care whether they're going to survive. They're acting out their impulses and their thoughts, and not paying attention to, really what is going to harm them or not. Another behavior that is a warning sign is self-harm, self-injury. Although I mentioned in the beginning that those are very different things. Someone that is engaging in self-harm is more likely, well, I won't say it's more likely. It's possible that because they're using their body as a way to try to regulate pain, that they could go more in deeper ways to actually try to relieve that pain, and that may go into suicidal thoughts. Very different. Not everybody that self-injures has suicidal thoughts, as I mentioned, but it could go into that direction if that's how they're deciding how to cope, how they're figuring out what makes them feel better. Isolating and wanting to be alone all the time is a big warning sign. If they're typically out there and doing things and all of a sudden they're not, and they're wanting to be alone all the time, or they all of a sudden don't have interest in playing baseball when it was the only thing that they loved, or, love to go skateboarding or whatever it is, people decreasing behaviors and activities they normally did and not having an interest in them is a warning sign. That's different from someone who decides that they're going to quit the baseball team because they really want to try out for soccer. It's a different energy level. So people change their minds and what they want to do and things that they want to experience in life. But if there's a devoid of an interest, if people are starting to not have interest in doing anything, that's a warning sign. And most people who attempt suicide give warning signs. It's not very common that someone that attempts suicide just does it impulsively. Although there is a significant body of research with our younger kids that if some kids with ADHD, attention deficit hyperactive disorder or attention deficit disorder, part of their diagnosis is impulsivity. And so they are at greater risk if they get into that feeling of feeling hopeless or down impulsively, they can attempt as well. Warning signs is basically something saying that something bad is could happen. We're not saying that it's something that will happen. It's not a causal thing. It's just saying that if you're seeing these warning signs, let's start to pay attention and ask some additional questions. Let's figure out if there's something else this child needs. It's not saying that it's definitely going to happen. And so, we don't want to feel like for sure something's going to happen, but we want to definitely pay attention and look at if we need to intervene at all or get some extra supports put in there. Ambivalence about death is very common among suicidal individuals. Most times, like I said, people that are suicidal, they don't want to die. They just want that pain to end. They feel like they can't live in that space anymore. We do know that, like I mentioned, suicide is preventable. And one really good explanation of that is, or showing of that, is how over time, counties, communities started putting up barriers on bridges, because people were dying by suicide by jumping off of bridges. Again, that's like restricting that taking away that option for people to die by suicide by jumping off a bridge. That actually significantly reduced the number of suicides that were going on in those areas. Another fallacy is that people believe that if someone wants to die, nothing's going to stop them. If they want to die, they're going to find something to try to kill themselves. Again, it's more in the moment of they want the pain to end. And so helping them get through that wave of that pain, because that pain isn't always going to be there. It's not going to be that intense always. So helping someone get through that wave of the pain, they're not necessarily just going to go try to find another way to kill themselves. We want to restrict means and barriers like that, so it takes them through that time frame, and then there'll be a pause again where they're not feeling that suicidal. So that's why restriction of means is so important. Why it's one of the paramount parts of suicide prevention, and we'll talk again a little bit more about that later. I wanted to go back to depression a little bit, because depression impacts people in behaviors. So become more impulsive, they isolate, they get irritable, act out, But there's this real negative view. There's also the thoughts that are around suicide, around depression. And that's a very negative view of everything. So nothing's ever going to get better. I'm always going to fail. It's all or nothing, black and white thinking, very negativistic view of the whole world. And then we also have the actual physical feelings of depression. When you guys think about depression, think about somebody that's depressed, what do you see? What kind of image do you conjure up in your brain? Think about it a second. What do you actually see? I love the concept of, there was a commercial out years ago of, it was for some antidepressant medication, and they showed this woman walking. It was like just a stick figure or something like that, and she had a big cloud overhead that was all scratched up and all gray, and big thundercloud that just kind of moved with her as she walked. And her you know, she was slouching and just bad, sad face on look. And that's not what it always looks like. But with the physical features of depression, there is this inability to change in sleep patterns, whether it's sleeping too much or too little, change in eating patterns, eating too much or too little. So then again, it's like with weight, it could be gaining weight or losing weight. Again, really looking at what are the changes that are going on in someone, significant changes that you can see over time with someone. And then, how they actually, their brain processes is different. Depression actually changes the brain chemistry in someone's body. So they don't move as fast, they don't think as fast, they can't concentrate necessarily. And so being able to get in there and talk to people and help them come up with words sometimes is really important. They may not know the words to say, they just know that they're just feeling horrible, they're just feeling different. They might not have the word of depression. And when you think about depression, a lot of people don't want to admit they're depressed because it's a mental health condition, and mental health is very stigmatized. And we're going to get into that a little bit more later too. Someone have a question? I heard someone go off mute. Okay, so now what I'd like to talk about a little bit is what triggering events are. So an event doesn't cause someone to actually attempt suicide. But what takes someone from thinking about suicide to actually acting on it, that is what we consider a triggering event. And again, we want to really make a clear distinction that is not a cause. Not a single event actually causes someone to attempt, but instead it's maybe the last straw. It's the last thing that they can think of doing to help themselves with their depression. And there are some significant triggering events that are pretty common. The biggest one are relationship issues. So when you have kids that are younger, if they're having family relationship issues, that is more of a trigger than having a problem with a friend at school or a teacher at school. As kids start to get older, you see that relationships with other peers or a boyfriend or a girlfriend, those can be more of the triggering event. Being bullied, being rejected, feeling like you're a failure. Again, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're failing or doing something wrong, but it's with that negative view of the world, it's how they're perceiving themselves, it's how they're perceiving their life. Another triggering event could be a death of a loved one, whether that's suicide of a friend or a relative, or even a death in the family. That can be a big trigger for people that are already depressed, already thinking about suicide. And then that might be the thing that takes them from thinking about it to actually attempting. Other stressors or triggering events that are common for people that actually attempt suicide. And that's, big family stressors, divorce, jail, deployment, significant financial issues at the home. And there's a lot of data out there. I haven't seen a lot of the actual research that's been done for it, but they're saying that COVID is actually a trigger for, the ramifications of being isolated and being at home, and all of those things has increased rates of suicide. That data is still being brought out and everything, but that could be a triggering event. I mean, it's a major life upheaval. They're not able to go to school with their friends. They're not able to necessarily get all the help they need with the things that they're struggling for with school wise or with relationship wise, being in a home environment that may not be as positive as being able to get out and be around other people. Youth who talk about killing themselves are more likely to attempt suicide than youth who don't. For some time you would hear people say things like, oh, they're just trying to get attention, or they're just saying that. They really don't want to do anything to kill themselves. What we do know is that almost everybody who dies by suicide is given a warning sign, like I mentioned. And we can never just ignore these threats. We always have to check it out if someone is saying that they want to kill themselves, or if they're alluding to the fact that they don't want to live anymore, if they don't want to be here anymore. We need to hear those little variations. It's not always going to be, I'm going to kill myself. It can just be that negative talk like, I can't do this anymore. I can't handle life anymore. But there is a time when people saying things is a way for them to try to reach out without necessarily always saying it explicitly, but also saying, I want to die, I want to kill myself, is something that we need to really make sure that we get someone to see someone immediately. We can't take that as a joke. Unfortunately, there's a lot going around on social media. People feel like they can say things on social media that they might not be able to say to someone's face. And we need to really educate our kids on, we need to take every single time anybody says something about not wanting to live or not wanting to not be able to handle things, we have to take it seriously and go to someone. That's at the schools, we teach them to go to a trusted adult, the ACT message, acknowledge that someone's having a problem, show them that you care, and then tell a trusted adult. We need to go to someone that can take action to get them the help that they need. And we can't ever just sit back and take it as a joke. I've gone into a lot of detail about really identifying the problems and looking at what it would look like. I want to give you a perspective from some youth. So the Mayo Clinic did this amazing video. It's only a 3 or 4 minute video, so it won't take tons of time, but they say it very specifically. It's a bunch of kids talking to adults about what to be looking for. So let me stop sharing this screen. And Diane and I tried this earlier and I successfully pulled the video up. So hopefully I'll be able to do it again. Hold on a second. Any questions before I start this video? Make sure that, Diana, will you thumbs me up if you can hear it?
I have my ups and downs, just like anybody else.
Maybe more than anybody else.
I can be hard to figure out.
And I like my privacy. I don't want you looking over my shoulder all the time.
But you know your kid better than anybody else. And if you think he's acting different than usual,
Acting really down, crying all the time for no good reason.
Or getting really mad, not able to sleep, Or sleeping too much.
shutting her friends out, or giving her stuff away.
Acting reckless, drinking, using drugs, staying out late.
Suddenly not doing stuff he used to love.
Or doing stuff that's just not like him.
It might be nothing to worry about. It might just be high school.
Or it might be something more. He might be depressed.
Not just feeling down, really depressed.
It might be that your kid is thinking about killing himself.
It happens. More than you think. More than it should.
And people say, I had no idea.
I thought it was just a phase he was going through.
I never thought she'd do it.
I wish he'd come to me.
I wish he'd said
I
something.
wish I'd said something.
When it's too late. So if you think your kid's acting different, if she seems like a different person, say something.
Say, what's wrong? How can I help?
And ask straight out. Are you thinking about killing yourself?
It doesn't hurt to ask. In fact, it helps.
When people are thinking about killing themselves, they want somebody to ask.
They want somebody to care.
Maybe you're afraid you'll make it worse if you ask. Like, you'll put the idea in their head.
Believe me, it doesn't work that way.
It doesn't hurt to ask.
In fact, the best way to keep a teenager from killing herself is to ask, are you thinking about killing yourself?
And what if they say yes?
Or maybe.
Or sometimes,
Well, here's what you don't say.
That's crazy.
Don't be such a drama queen.
you're making too much of this.
That boy's not worth killing yourself over. That's not going to solve anything.
You're just trying to get attention.
You're not going to kill yourself.
What you do say is,
I'm sorry you're feeling so bad.
How can I help?
We'll get through this together.
Let's keep you safe.
A lot of people think about killing themselves, adults and kids.
most of them never try it, but some of them do. So if your kid says,
I'd be better off dead.
I can't live with this.
I'm gonna kill myself,
Take her seriously. Find someone she can talk to about it. Someone who knows how to help.
Sometimes kids want to kill themselves because something happened. A breakup, a failure.
But sometimes it goes deeper, and it's not going to go away by itself.
Get some help. Talk to your doctor.
Or a counselor at school.
Or your minister.
but don't just let it drop.
And make sure that your kid always has someone to turn to. Someone he trusts.
Make a list together right then. 3, 4, 5 names.
Put a suicide hotline number on there too.
Have him keep that list in his wallet, so he always knows where to turn.
Make sure your home is safe.
If you have pills she could use to hurt herself, lock them up.
If you have a gun, don't just lock it up. Get it out of the house. The bullets too.
And one more thing. If you think your kid might be about to hurt himself, don't leave him alone.
Take him to the emergency room.
Call 911 if you have to.
We all have our ups and downs, but sometimes it's more than that.
If you think something's wrong, the only way to find out is to ask.
Ask straight out. Are you thinking about killing yourself?
Don't wait until you're sure. Trust your gut.
Because it never hurts to ask.
And it can make a big difference.
All the difference.
In your kid's life.
It's a pretty powerful 3-4 minute video, and I show it after I've done part of my presentation, because if I just showed that, you guys wouldn't need me talking, because they basically covered everything I just said, right? Okay. Let me All right. So next, let's move into, okay, we've identified all that's going on, the concerning things, you know, what to be looking for, the warning signs. Let's look at what some of the protective factors are that our kids have, and you know, helping build on some of these. Individual characteristics are so important with our kids, and you know, having self-esteem is something that is really worked after. If someone is able to have self-esteem, that's basically them being able to identify what is good about them, what is special about them, what do they bring as, you know, who they are, and how do we develop that self-esteem in kids? The way we do it is by showing them, telling them, recognizing those characteristics when we see them. There's a difference between self-esteem and self-confidence, And self-confidence is knowing you're good at something. It's a behavior that you do, where self-esteem is really being able to identify the internal characteristics that make you you and that make you special. And so the more that we can give feedback to our kids, you know, if they're a goofy kid, they have a good sense of humor, laugh at them, tell them that, my gosh, that is so funny. You're such a funny person. When you see someone being, a child being kind, say very specifically what you're seeing. That was a very kind and nice thing for you to do. We need to help them link what their behavior is with what they are, you know, of what the actual thing is and how that is intrinsically part of themselves. Another way we do that is by modeling, right? So model the behaviors that we want and believe are good qualities in a person. So, you know, for example, I remember when my daughter was 4 years old and we were driving across country. I went into a gas station. My mom was in the car with my daughter. She was 4. And there was somebody behind me and I held the door for them because they were struggling to walk or get into the car or something. And my daughter actually turned to my mom and said, "You see my mom? Do you see what she just did?" And she noticed those things. And so the more that we can model, you know, the kindness and the generosity and all of that, as well as identify when somebody else is doing it or when they are doing it, that's really important. Family and support systems are a protective factor. Just in general, being able to be there, like I said, it's different when kids are younger. They are much more into the family oriented aspects of their life. And as they grow older, friends become a very big part of their life as well. Both are extremely important. Schools are a support system. Churches are a support system. Clubs that they belong to are a support system. Whatever it is that they really feel like they can do and feel good about what they're doing is part of their protective factor. The other thing is, and I've gone on about this before, so the restriction of means. We know that it's vitally important, and the kids in that video said it better than I did. If there is something there that someone could use to harm themselves, and we are concerned that they may be struggling, we need to remove access to those things. We start their lives out in that way. When our kids are little, there's no way we're going to leave a bottle of pills sitting on the counter or a knife laying out where they could accidentally grab it or something like that. We're used to doing that restriction of means. As they grow older, we kind of forget about that a little bit, but it's really important to continue that, particularly if you have a kid that's struggling. And then be able to get them into mental health care, you know, what's around them. Sometimes it's hard to find mental health care in different areas, but really looking for that, going to figure out what kind of resources you need to go to find the mental health care, whether that's another doctor or whether that's their school or you know, the coaches that they are with, helping identify what kind of care is in the community that you're in. And then once kids actually do have some type of therapy or mental health care, that in of itself is a therapeutic support. That builds protective factors with them and makes them less risk to actually do something to harm themselves. Talking, that in of itself, which we're going to go into now a little bit more, is communicating and talking to our kids is a protective factor. Talking to our grandkids, talking to the neighbor kids, really just opening communication and allowing them to know that they have people out there that are interested in them and are willing to talk to them. So you don't cause a person to consider to kill themselves by talking about suicide. They talked about it a little bit, and those kids talked about it in the video, but there's been a myth that's been going on for a long time, that if you actually talk to somebody about suicide when they're feeling down, that's going to give them the idea, and then they're actually going to act upon it. It's not farther from the truth, and there's been a lot of research to show that's not true. Actually, asking someone about suicide is the best thing you can do if someone is struggling. It opens up the communication. It allows them to feel seen and heard and know that they're cared about and that you're there to help them. Unfortunately, there's the stigma about mental health. There's a concern that parents many times don't believe that there's any way that their child would do something to harm themselves. It's off. It's like, can't get into someone's brain, a parent's brain a lot of times. They can fathom it. We know that 50 to 90% of parents were unaware that their child was having suicidal thoughts. And just as scary, if not scarier, 60 to 95% of parents were unaware that their child actually made a suicide attempt. That goes back to one of the first statements I talked about when we talked about the number of kids that actually attempt suicide, like in the high school years. It's happening and we don't know it's happening. A suicide attempt can be whatever it is that someone's doing to try to end their lives. If they think taking one aspirin is going to kill them, that's considered a suicide attempt. It may not cause death, it may not be lethal, but it's where their brain is at the time that we need to be paying attention to. And so how do we help with this awareness? How do we create a safety net? Personally, I had a really difficult time with this. I'm a therapist. Not only am I a therapist, but I work in suicide prevention. When my daughter was just starting high school, I found out that she was having suicidal thoughts. She was cutting. I had no idea. I did know that she was struggling and that she had some depression. And so I already started had her into a therapist and doing these things, but I had no idea that she was struggling to the fact that, to the amount that she was actually thinking about dying, thinking about killing herself. That was such a devastating and difficult time. I thought I was doing everything right. And so what wasn't I doing right? Need to make sure this is what I did do. I did reach out for help when I saw that she was struggling, and I reached out for more once I knew she was having suicidal thoughts. Can't give up. You know, I talked about that irritability that depression can have. She pushed me so hard. I was like the devil in her eyes at the time. And all I was trying to do was help her. But I didn't give up. I kept getting her the help she needed. This I didn't do very well. I blamed myself a lot, but that was not helpful. That only then showed, made her feel like she couldn't necessarily come to me about everything. So you can't blame yourself when there is a mental health concern or concern. Take care of yourself. That's why I started the program out with tonight, is making sure that, you have something that is helping you, so you can help other people. It's like, the airplane, you got to put the mask on your self before you can put it on the next person. Be that safety net. The key is really helping our kids know who they can communicate with. Kids a lot of times are scared to come forward and necessarily tell people about the suicidal thoughts. They're confused themselves, they're embarrassed, they're scared. Sometimes they worry that it's going to hurt their parents' feelings or make them upset. It's a caretaking thing. And so we need to also help our kids know, who can you go to if you start to struggle? And you can't start a conversation like this earlier than ever. You just always need to be promoting that. Who do you have in your life? Who are the adults that you have in your life that you can go to if you need help? If you can't talk to me about something, who can you talk to? And that's another thing that I did do is, I had some really clear conversations with some adults in our lives that I knew my daughter felt close to, and let my daughter know and my friend know that if they talk about something, she does not need to tell me about that. They do not need to share that with me. That they need to have a trusted adult they can go to, with the exception of if she was thinking about killing herself, she was going to need to get, someone into get my daughter into get some help right through me. But really being that safety net and looking at it. What was so devastating is that even though I'm a therapist and I work in this, and I'm a good listener, I connect well with people, I never specifically asked her when I noticed she was depressed. I never said, "Are you thinking about suicide? Do you ever wish you were dead?" I never asked her those specific questions. How much I could have saved in time and energy if I would have, and my daughter's pain, if I would have been able to ask that up front. We can't be afraid to ask and communicate. Now, I'm aware that it's 8:04. I do have a few more slides. Would you like me to continue to go forward with maybe another 5 minutes? Wrap it up instead?
No, go ahead. It's fine.
Okay. So that communication piece is just essential. So bringing in anybody and everyone that needs to be involved, bring them into the fray. Let everybody know that there are things that are going on, so the child can get the most help that they need. How do you start the conversation if you're concerned about a youth? You start it by actually pointing out the things that you're noticing, showing them that you care and being willing to hear them and listen. Problem solving is something that you do later. If you want to open up a conversation and help them start to be able to come forward and talk, you have to be able to notice and say what you're seeing. I notice you haven't been yourself a lot lately. Is there something bothering you? You seem really down, spending a lot of time in your room alone. I'm here for you if you want to talk. I would love to know how you've been doing recently. Can we grab a bite to eat and chat for a while? Really pinpointing the things that you're seeing without labeling them. So you're not saying, "Hey, you seem depressed," because that's a label that we don't necessarily want to put out there. What we want to say is, you're acting differently. You're acting down. You're isolating yourself. You're not being the same, goofy stuff that you're normally being. What's going on? Can we talk about this? And if they can't talk in that moment, you say, because being confronted with something when you're struggling and they're already probably confused might be difficult for them to talk in the minute. In that moment, you say, "I'm here. I'm going to be in the other room. I'll be here all night. Anytime you want to come talk to me, tonight, tomorrow night, anytime, come talk to me." I've even actually have some of my clients and their families using journals where they write back and forth to each other if there's something going on, because sometimes speaking it out loud is hard. So we need to get creative on how we can help our youth actually come forward and talk about these things. I want people to really understand stigma. Been playing around with that quite a bit tonight, talking about that. And I love this this meme. I got it off the internet, but let me just show one thing. If we were to replace the word, let's see, one of these words, I'm going to say, so 4 and 5 think it's harder to admit to having a mental illness than any other illness. 1 and 2 are frightened by people with diabetes. Psycho and nuts and mentally ill, crazy are the most commonly misused descriptions of people with mental illness. You see how I did that with the last one. 1 and 2 are frightened by people with diabetes. When you put it in those terms, mental illness is as much of a health concern as diabetes is. It affects the brain, chemistry. There's bodily changes. And so we need to really help and think about how we are putting things out there, and shutting people down that might be struggling with some of these things, feeling comfortable coming forward and saying, hey, I need some help. If you felt like someone was going to think that you're psycho and nuts or crazy, do you think you're going to go forward and say, hey, I've been really struggling with depression and I've been acting out, or whatever it is? People will shy away from really acknowledging these problems that are very treatable, and suicide is preventable, but mental health is treatable. So I would have everybody just kind of think about how they think about and how they portray things about mental illness. We all do it at some point or another. And so just be cautious of that. In order to strengthen connection with our kids, really setting a stage and providing those opportunities. Like I said earlier, hey, I'm going to be in my room all night. Feel free to come talk to me. But even before that, what are you putting out there as a daily thing? Are you having family meals? Are you willing to talk about difficult things and difficult topics when they come up? Letting them know that you're there to listen and hear whatever's going on and really hear them. Later, you can then, after you acknowledge how hard it is, what they're struggling with, validating their feelings. Validating, by the way, doesn't mean you agree with what they're thinking. It means you're validating their feelings. You're caring about what they're saying. You care about what they're feeling. After you do that, then you can go into problem solving mode. But until you actually validate and really show them and let them understand that they have been heard, you don't want to go into that problem solving mode, because that can shut them down more at times. You want to be consistent and persistent with your love and your attention and your willingness to talk about difficult things. My favorite word when it comes to how to open up connections with kids, and actually it's with anybody, but in particular with kids, is be curious. Just when you want to say how to fix it, ask another question. Because as adults, we're always wanting to fix the problem, give them a different way to handle it. What we need to do is let them express themselves, let them express their feelings and express what's going on with them. Let them know they're cared about, and then you can go forward. And so how's the best way to do that is with being curious. When in doubt, just ask another question. And then obviously advocate for youth. Whenever you see an area you can do that, whether that's connecting with their school, connecting with their parents, if it's somebody else's child or something like that. Really advocating and letting people know what's going on. A couple of the things that are the essentials with mental health are sleep, nutrition, and exercise. Once all of these are in balance, if one gets off balance, the others start to get off balance. And if these three can stay in place, this actually is something that's been proven to treat depression, and it's helpful. Any doctor you go to, any counselor you go to, they're going to ask about these three things and assess this to try to help get these things on an even keel again. It can prevent and treat depression. And then really promoting self-care. This is the last slide that I really wanted to go into, and really helping kids know that taking care of themselves is really important. Getting schoolwork is really important too, but also, having different ways to reach out for care for themselves, whether it's through some type of spiritual understanding of church or meditation or yoga, whatever it is that someone likes, nature, having social connection is so important. And all these things are being really tried right now with COVID. It's really important. So we do sometimes need to let up on the whole concerning aspect about social media and help our kids understand how to use it in a positive way, because it is a very powerful, positive communication tool. You just have to guard them against some of the things that are difficult about it as well. Other self-care is the emotional aspect. So what do they need to do to decrease their stress and show that they're a good person? Those things make you feel better when you actually feel and show that you're a good person. And then physical, so important, just like the last slide I showed you, is making sure that you're being physical, getting some activity and exercise, however it is that's most appealing to you. And I'm saying this, and this isn't just for kids, obviously, these are all very good for all of us, not just kids, but that when they're kids, this is when their behaviors and habits are starting to develop. So really encouraging a very good mix of all of these is important. All right. I think I wanted to put this up here as a resource. If people have phones, they want to take a picture of the slide or whatever. These are really, really important numbers. And I have them in my phone. I have them. Any parent I talk to, any child that I see for therapy, I have them put these numbers in their phone, because even if they don't need it for themselves, if they run across someone that might be in need of it, you're going to have it right then and there and be able to share it with somebody, and or call this number or text this number with someone while they're feeling in the place that they are to help support them. There's a couple different ways to do that. So it's very important resources that are national. All right, I'd like to open up for any kind of questions if anybody has any at this point.
I have a question.
Sure.
You had talked about youth suicide as being the second leading cause of death. What is the first?
Great question. The first question is accidents. And unfortunately, under accidents, some of accidents are overdoses, some are car accidents, some are reckless behavior, which may also be suicides that aren't counted as a suicide because for whatever reason that's not. An important, I'm so glad you asked that question, because with accidents, we have shown that if we make it a public health concern, we can actually reduce accidents. We did that with cars, right? We require baby seats, we require restraints, we have cell phone laws now. There are a lot of different things that we've put into place as a community public health concern that have significantly reduced the numbers of deaths by accidents, car accidents. And if we could do the same thing when it comes to suicide, how amazing would that be? We need to really make sure that people understand the public health concern of it and be willing to dive in there. It's a really difficult topic. It's a really scary topic. And the more that we can actually show that it's okay, not only okay to talk about, but it's important to be able to model that we can talk about this as adults, and be able to allow kids that are struggling, or people in general that are struggling, to be able to come forward more often. Any other questions?
No more questions?
I have one.
Okay.
Go ahead, Carol.
My question is, I know this relates mainly to youth, but do most of these factors and all the presentation that you gave here tonight are very equivalent and the same as dealing with adults? And the reason I ask that is because, unfortunately, this past October, I lost a cousin who completed suicide.
I'm very sorry.
Even though his brother and sister-in-law were well aware of health issues and things, they tried to get him help, and he hung himself.
Right.
You know, and over the years, I've, you know, had, not in my family, but other friends and people who were really, really down and depressed. And my big thing is, one of the things you said is to be persistent.
Yes.
And how long do you as an individual try? I know some people, right now, my husband's dealing with a friend that is going through what we're calling hypochondria, because soon as he gets one problem solved, he's looking for another one. Is that a sign of someone who is leaning towards suicidal tendencies, that they just can't seem to find anything positive to move forward with?
Well, that and having a concern about a continual concern that something bad is happening isn't necessarily a sign that that it's suicide. And I want to be really clear that warning signs and risk factors, again, don't cause suicide, but those are things that we need to be paying attention to. And so I love that you're thinking about that, because what can you do? You can say, hey, I'm really concerned about you. I see that you're really struggling these days. You know, have you ever thought about, have you thought about wanting to die? Have you ever considered that? Opening that door then takes the mystery out of it. It gives someone the opportunity that's struggling to be able to come forward with that specific concern. When someone feels like other people know that they're struggling in that way, like when I said having a therapeutic support is a protective factor. Having people support you, having that social structure in your life, feeling the support from around you is a protective factor. So absolutely, it's just you having the question means ask it.
Now, when you're
You can
working
blame it on me.
when you are working with youth, for example, how soon, or is there sort of like a I guess I want to say a process you go through? I'll use you as the example. Before you get the parents involved, I mean, let's say through the schools and teachers are working with programs like this, and they have a student that they see showing a lot of these signs. I know you brought out the statistics and percentages of how high the percentages were. The parents a lot of times aren't even aware.
Right.
You
And
know.
that's what's wonderful about that program that we're doing at the schools, is it brings it to the forefront, and we actually do screenings. Not only we do screenings, but then we ask kids, hey, do you have a concern about yourself or anybody else? And it brings to the forefront kids that may not have been noticed as having a concern otherwise. And to answer your question specifically, if we have the knowledge that someone is having suicidal thoughts, we absolutely immediately call the parent. And it becomes more difficult once, you know, people start to get older, because you don't have the control over the environment as much as, and so like your husband's friend, you know, does he have guns in the home? Does he have access to things that he could use to harm himself? That might be something, if he says yes, he's having wishing he was dead ever, or thinking about dying, whatever it is, helping problem solve and restrict those means now. So, hey, you know what? It really sounds like this is not a good a time for you to have that shotgun in your house. Maybe we can just store it over at my house for a while. You know, or to the sheriff's department, or, you know, something. I know that there's community organizations that, you know, will store weapons and things like that, but it basically opens that communication channel. But, you know, helping people that are adults that don't have parental supervision, safety plan and safety proof their home is a really important part. What I would say is, you know, help them get into some type of assessment, whether they go to their doctor. Hey, you know, there are things that people can do to help with these thoughts. Why don't you, let's get you an appointment with your doctor. Let's get an appointment at the mental health facility. Those would be some of the things that I would, after you listen. Again, you don't want to jump in with problem solving immediately. You want to help them feel like they're being really heard and listened to and acknowledged. And then problem solving can take place after that.
Laurel?
Yeah.
This is Debbie Cantor. I had the opportunity to take mental health for first aid for youth and adults in the last 4 months. And it really opened my eyes up to a lot of things. You know, just about having those difficult conversations, not to be afraid.
Yeah.
And not that I've had to use it, thankfully, but I feel a lot better after taking both of those trainings, and I would highly recommend them.
Yeah, those are wonderful trainings, particularly for people that are out in the community working, you know, in some type of place where they interact with people of many different areas. It can be youth, it can be adults, it's all of it. I'm really glad to hear that you've been able to take advantage of that. And
I would just like to add, I have a son who's a teacher, and when they're last out in a different state, but when they had their last negotiations, their insurance was expanded to include counseling and mental health as an option, like you choose your dental option or your vision option. There was also that component, and that was so popular with the teachers who had school-age children.
Oh, no kidding. Thank you so much, because, you know, for the longest time, and it's starting to slowly change, like your point right now, but you know, mental health was never considered the same as physical health, and it's all a health concern. They're both medical concerns. Mental health is a medical concern. Thank you for sharing that.
Any other questions, ladies?
I have one.
Go ahead, Sandy.
I was going to ask Laurel how her daughter's doing today.
Thank you so much for asking. You know, that was, wow, 6-7 years ago. And she struggled on and off quite a bit, but she's in a much better place. She's feeling some success in different areas of her life, and she's, you know, she's doing better. And just this year, so she's going to be 21. This started when she was 14, 21. She just now is calling me and telling me about her feelings. It has taken a long time. But like I said, I stuck in there, you know, just let her know that whenever she needed me, I was going to be there, and she finally has come around. So thank you.
Well, thank you for sharing, because I think your story and letting us know how long it can take for someone to reach out is important. Often we think that it will be an overnight cure, but I'm sure that's not the realistic time frame for most people.
Right. And yeah, it was, like I said before, you know, I'm a therapist. It was a surprise that, you know, she did. And she and I were like the bestest friends up until that point. And then it was like, whew. And that's mental health. That is depression. That affects the brain, affects behavior, affects thoughts, all of that. So yeah, be gentle with yourselves if you have someone in your life that is struggling, because this is about their mental health. It's not about you. That's what, luckily I was able to slowly learn and accept.
Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome.
Anybody else? Linda?
Well, we'd like to thank you, Laurel, for being with us this evening. And this is a difficult topic, and we do appreciate your experience and your expertise in this area and taking the time to be with us this evening.
It's really my pleasure. I was happy to be here. I've been looking forward to it for months now. So thank you for asking.
Oh, very good. We're happy to have you. And thank you to each of you for spending your evening here. It's a difficult topic to talk about, and I'm glad you decided to spend your evening with us. Just a reminder.
One more thing I want to say about that real quick. You just reminded me. If
Yes.
you still can't bring yourself to talk about it, find somebody who can. If you identify the issues and you still feel like it's not in your ability to talk about it, because it's tough for some people for a lot of different reasons, find somebody that can address it with the person you're concerned about. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, very good. Thank you. I appreciate you adding that, because that's true. That's very true. I wanted to remind the members that if you have not signed in, make sure you go to the chat feature and type in your first and last name and your chapter so that you get credit for your attendance. If you want PDU credit, make sure you let me know and I will send you a certificate. This session does qualify for professional development units. Also, we have another session on Thursday with Janet Hess on expanded borders, and there was an e-blast that was sent out over the weekend if you would like to sign up for that. That one also qualifies for PDU credit. Is there anything that anyone wants to add?
Yeah, I want to add something, and I don't know if you can hear me or not. I am off mute. I am a teleconference due to my computer went on a glitch yesterday, so I was not able to get it together in order for me to do the, at any rate. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, but would you identify yourself?
Yeah, I'm getting to do that. I'm definitely getting ready to do that. I've been on for an hour and a half, and it's been the most engaging and caring and knowledgeable session that I could have ever engaged in, and it's much appreciated. Now, I will identify myself. I am Gail. Last name is Ali, A-L-I, and I am New Road Chapter.
Okay.
Yes, so not able to sign in.
All we see is a telephone there.
Right. We've got her for attendance now, so that's a good thing.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Gail.
I definitely want to be counted. Yes, thank you.
Yes.
All right.
I had something to add.
Okay.
Sure.
I just wanted to reiterate what the speaker said. We know of a family relative of my husband's son in another city committed suicide, and he shot himself. Very popular student. I don't know what the issues were, but the mother used to be a teacher and the father was a doctor. So I don't know what the motive was. The boy seemed very popular, was a good student. Who knows, partly if COVID put, pressure on the situation, but it probably, these were not stupid people. So, I mean, you don't know the pressures that maybe you missed, and maybe they're very good at hiding, and like you said, the father's hunting gun, whatever. And, maybe he was successful on the first try, and he could have been more than 15 or 17 years old. So it's a terrible tragedy when you don't see it coming or don't recognize it. And it's probably very prevalent, like that data says. It's a very sad thing for the family. And I don't know, if I were the mother, I would probably never forgive myself, like she said. That would be a tough one.
It's a very real problem, and we're so glad that Laurel has given us the tools to deal with this situation. And again, we want to thank you, Laurel, and I want to thank each one of you. And if there's nothing else, then each of you have a good evening. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Laurel.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Diana.
Bye. Take care, everyone.
You too.